Okay. Hi. Could you tell me something about yourself, your name, and then what you're doing?
My name is Pamela, and I've been working on some flash fiction, it's called. Just let me explain that words are my company. I spend much of my time these days with words rather than people. No offense. During the pandemic, writers took advantage of the time in, not out, to write more. And I also retired from teaching writing of various kinds and ways at two universities, Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, and Binghamton University in upstate New York. In the last 5 years, I taught courses in flash prose. That's flash fiction and flash memoir, two different flash courses. They were originally called the short story, but now it's called flash prose. So this form that now runs 50 to 1,000 words suited my way of writing. It's like poetic like prose, and is now popular. I also taught drama classes early on in my career, and later wrote a play that I presented, and I also acted in. So I like to write in scenes, which is how I think of my flash prose. I think of them as scenes. So when I wrote my memoir, I'm So Glad You're Here, which was published in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, I wrote in scenes rather than chapters. And it turned out to be, as readers told me, a page turner. I tried to write a novel in chapters, but failed. Failed is a really ugly word for a writer, but when I thought about it after words, so to speak, I thought better of it. It failed. I'm not going to say I failed. It failed in one way, but not another, as it helped me process what I was writing about, which was important about the life I had led. And notice I'm saying had, meaning it's over. Words enabled me to search. And back to your question about words now. Words enabled me to search and do relevant research and move on to be all I can be now after all. So now I'm putting together a collection of my mostly published flash prose I'm calling micro stories. And I say mostly published, they've been published in various journals. It's very popular now to have a call for flash fiction, flash prose, 50 to 1,000 words. I've written many 100-word stories. Well, then how about, would you like me to read a very short story? Mm-hmm. May I do that?
That's
it's
fine.
called Going to Die. Some literary magazine editor asked put out a call for a very short story. It's just a certain number of words, and I thought, well, I think I can do that. I've been trying to write something, and I kept putting it down, and something that bothered me. Often it's about people in my life or something that happened, but then I move around. And I couldn't seem to do this for a long time. And then when I saw that, I said, maybe it'll fit in this. And actually, you helped me. You saw the paper on the floor of my basement. And the piece is called Going to Die, and I scribbled it. I often just scribble, and I might just put it in the basement. I'll look later. And you saw it, and you picked it up, and you said, hey, what is this? And I said, well, it's just not working. It's something I was working on, and I was kind of grabbed it from him. Well, I kind of said, you know what? I think Look, I got this call from this literary journal. I'll try it. So may I read it now? Going to Die. Going to die. It sounds terrible. Going to die. So listen, everybody. He called to tell her he was going to die from AIDS. He tested positive. Jimmy, whom she met at 16, who introduced her as his girlfriend way back then when he passed himself off as bi. She fumbled words so death wouldn't be true until he yelled, I'm dying, dying! Silence when he put it like that. At lunch, some company men had talked about retirement plans, he said, how that felt. Being in a world where he didn't belong wouldn't be long. A few years. You have a few years, his doctor said. He could stop contributing to his pension plan, cash in now, take early retirement, build that roof garden, finish decorating his Back Bay apartment in Boston, spend April in Paris, right up Route 1 on the California coast. While I still can, he said.
Mm-hmm.
We clap now. So
what do you think about our culture? How do you think that American culture treats the topic of death?
It doesn't. Most people don't want to talk about death. Oh, I'm sorry, you're whoever died or whatever. And I read a book. I can't remember the title of it now, but it was about that very problem that people should embrace and talk about it. Oh, you don't talk about it. I'm so sorry, people say. And I thought that was so interesting because people need to, just even like this, open up, and it needs to be talked about. So that interests me, and I might try to do something more with that. About mourning. Okay, mourning, mourning. We kind of skip mourning. We say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And several people have talked to me about this problem. One of my colleagues in the university, her father died, and she just was beside herself, and she couldn't really express it, and you don't talk about everything. And I sent her that book, which opens up. Yeah, you need to honor that, and there are even now some workshops for that, and so we don't do that, at least in this country. I don't know. I won't go on further, but you get the picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
do you think that in our global society we will start to talk more about death, or do you think also the world is just not even dealing with that issue?
And we've got a big death coming. Pardon me, but the death of the planet, the world. I'm not being so pessimistic, but it's pretty obvious we're all fighting each other instead of all joining together. This is my dream. Everyone would join together to save our planet. And why are we fighting each other and everything? So, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Would you like me to read another one? Wanted, a very short love story about Hemingway, who it was sad what happened with him. Let me see if I can find it. I have to scroll down here. Any conditions. Going to die. Sorry, just wish I could find something else. I wanted a very, again, short. That's longer than that other one though. Wanted, in all cap letters. Wanted, a very short love story. When Hemingway was serving in Italy as an ambulance driver with the American Red Cross during World War I, he was wounded. He had just turned 19. He joked with his nurse Agnes while she prepared him for an operation to remove a bullet from his leg. She switched to night duty so she could spend more time with him. After he got crutches, he made the rounds so she could stay in his bed. The plan was that he would go back home to the States to live with his parents for a few months and get a job, and then she would join him, and they would get married and live together ever after. But he had difficulty dealing with the aftermath of war in the Midwestern town that remained unchanged. The war had changed him. His mother didn't understand. Then came a letter from Agnes, which pleased him before he opened it, and read that she had met someone else. He felt devastated, emotionally wounded by a loved one who had nursed his war wounds. 3 years later, he married and moved to Paris. He divorced and married again and again, each time leaving before he was left. Quote, these are his words, "When you are badly wounded the first time, you know it can happen again," he said. For many years, he carried Agnes's Dear John letter with him until he finally killed her off in one of his novels. Although he was never charged with murder, authorities declared he should have been wanted. It's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
So what does that say about relationships?
Well, people like relationships, and each of us sort of thinks as one begins, it's going to work in this way, and this is. But there are two people involved in. And there's like the world. This was World War II. This was somebody moving over here and assuming this, and even his mother, like, what's your problem? Even the relationship with the family, they didn't understand what was just. Well, they didn't even experience the war or look at anything. Why are you acting like that? And then he gets this Dear John letter. That's what they were called, right? Dear John letters, and back then, and so. I do have quite a few relationship stories in here. Want me to read a couple more, or what?
Mm-hmm.
You even knew this person. She died. I think she put herself to sleep finally, but we don't know. She was very smart. I'm talking about Ursul Molinaro.
Mm-hmm.
This is called She Smoked Gauloise. I didn't even know what those were. They're cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't get them in most places. Like, she's from Paris. I'm talking now. I'm not reading quite yet. But she lived in New York City in this special village neighborhood, and she really liked being in that particular apartment because she couldn't walk very well toward the end, I'm going to say. And so she could go over to this particular drugstore that carried Gauloise. No one carried Gauloise in the United States. I mean, it's really hard to find it. I mean, it's very French. Okay, so I love titles. You can probably see I'm pretty, even now, that I'm pretty good at titles. But my students were laughing one time because I said, yeah, I'm pretty good at titles, but sometimes my writing doesn't live up to the title. I mean, I could just put a whole bunch of titles, and really, for some reason, I just love that play. So I like this title, don't you? She Smoked Gauloise.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is one paragraph short, and it's a flash prose. She didn't like geraniums because they reminded her of Paris during World War II, when she hid two Jews who later returned to ask where their things were. Clothes, papers, etc., which astonished her, for she had gotten rid of everything in order to protect them, and now they were angry. Worse, she had ended up in a 4x4 jail cell, which she had to share with her husband, whom she later disregarded, speaking of relationships, whom she later disregarded, though she kept his name, Molinaro, when she moved to New York. This was all I could get out of her over years as she puffed on her unfiltered, absolutely, that's what they are too, unfiltered, as she puffed on her unfiltered, made in France, not for the faint of heart, Gauloise, and sipped white Burgundy. When she got to 100, not years, she would never tell you her age, not years, but stories, plays, novels, she said it was time to stop. She died presumably from an old age that she never revealed, and even the New York Times couldn't find out.
So what do you think about that? What do you think is the message of that story?
Well, there are different messages. I keep thinking of her asking me, maybe a few months before she died, if I would give her whatever, I don't know what it's called, you can, and in some place, I think in Vermont, I think it's in Vermont, excuse me if it's not, it's one of those states, I think Vermont, you can take some, I'm going to call it medicine, that's not the right word, and you can die from it, just, at old age, and you're not functioning
Euthanasia?
Well. I guess that what it is? Okay, sorry, but is it a liquid or some kind of?
It depends
pill?
it depends on how probably an injection.
Well, she had a liquid, and it was in the refrigerator, and she showed it to me, and I was a good friend of hers, of course, and she said, I want to ask you something, and I knew when I saw that, because she was having more and more trouble walking, and she had almost 100 stories at the way, and I said, I just can't do. I can't do that. I don't feel comfortable to. And we did. She said okay, and we didn't talk about it. But I know a friend that a good writer friend of hers who probably did it. So I guess, I guess what I'm thinking about is ending our lives. I mean, does it have to be such I mean, it's too bad so many, I think I'm now, because I'm just reading the news in the New York Times and other places, all about all these older people, because I'm older now, and there's a huge crowd of people my age and older, and they're living longer because we can do that now, sort of, but it hurts so much for a lot of people, and Rasul didn't want to be this, you couldn't do this, and she didn't. That's right. I think that's something to consider. That all of us consider. About time to go. It doesn't mean you go and just kill yourself as such. I mean, just that's. We have a lot of mental health issues that are not being addressed. So there's that. But I am interested in that.
Why do you think you wrote about death so much?
I didn't. I haven't.
I mean, well, these particular pieces that you read.
I did. I didn't even realize.
Death.
I didn't realize. Well, these ones are people related to me. I mean, not literal relatives, but I mean.
So also, do you think like does our culture need to, you talked about old age? Do you feel like, what do you think our culture needs to do? Does it need to change its attitudes about old age, or?
Yeah, that's pretty tricky. The government, I don't know about the
government. Not the government, but do people, because there are lots of older people now.
Yeah, there are.
So do you think that society should have a different approach to old age, or get to know older people as well? Like,
that is, and I there was a podcast about that, about what did you say about older people, about
getting to know older people?
Yes, because what often happens, and it is very sad, as they are, I guess, dying or something, for so many people, they just feel rejected isn't the right word. They feel out of place, and they don't, and they really don't know what to do, or they might be in some home somewhere that's, they just keeping them alive, but it's not like living. So I think it's a very good question, and there are some places that do allow euthanasia, like I think it's in Vermont and somewhere in Washington. And I remember listening to it was someone I didn't know personally, but I knew about. She was well known and lived in Ithaca, New York, and she told her husband and her sister she really wanted to. She was, diagnosed with something horrible, a cancer that was just, and she couldn't do anything like she usually did, and that she wanted to go to Washington, state of Washington, or somehow work out something so she could be put to sleep. And her husband and her sister were really upset at first, and then they kind of sat with her and they said, we need to honor you. I mean, we don't want to see you like this. You don't want to be like this. We don't want to do this. And they really had quite a conversation about it. In fact, it was made into a little video to show people, so we could talk about it. But I don't want to just talk about
death and suffering.
Well, here's a person suffering. Here's another. Paris Underground. Do you want to hear that?
Okay.
Again, see, I grew up as an observer in my family. I had a kind of troubled family, I'll put it that way. I was born late into my parents' lives. I had 3 much older siblings and so forth. So, and there was a lot going on there. There were problems. One brother had mental illness. My father had, it turned out, had some kind of mental illness that was misdiagnosed. And there, so you can see, but I was this little kid, and we had this hallway in this little Cape Cod house. So I could see, as a little kid, 5 years old or whatever, I could see the kitchen, what was going on in the kitchen, and the dining room. And so, and I had my blanket, a blankie or something, and I would observe. I observed so much in that house because the adults were busy trying, well, Jerry, now you come here and leave your phone. We're going to, and I was fascinated. Why is she going down the cellar and all these things? So, but that really, writers talk about how they got into writing, and I feel so. I sometimes hear, well, that didn't happen to me. Meaning, I read books early on, lots of books. Some famous writer read so many books. I was at the library. We had one book in the house. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. That was it. So it wasn't a books, and I thought, gee, if people ask me about that, and I can say, oh yeah, I grew up with books, and I didn't. But what I did, I realized, is that I grew up observing. I didn't, as little kids, I'm going to observe. I just did. And that's, all my writing is based on observations. So I'll read you. So I think that's kind of, it makes sense. But I had talent with words. I mean, I must have inherited something somewhere, So I'll just read you. Here's here's an example. I was in Paris many times, and I was on the metro one day, and people were standing and everything. And then I looked over at this person. Oh, and I was really happy because I just bought a really good new Parisian hat from this great store, and I felt so good sitting there and everything. Okay. Paris Underground. Great title, isn't it? Again, I'm good at my titles. So I directly talk to her. I write her a letter, this woman. Well, let me read it. Dear woman, okay, Paris Underground. Dear woman, asleep on the Paris metro. I snapped your photograph without permission, without your knowledge even, turning you into an object like a bridge over the Seine. A bridge you'd be under, sleeping on some bench perhaps. Is that where you're headed? Will you get off at the Louvre stop where Mona Lisa stares back at you, eyeing you head on like the eye of my camera? Or will you go round again, sleeping on the metro, dreaming you are a child again, in a car or on a train, the motion lulling you to sleep? It is August. Outside the sun is bright. You must not have slept last night. The raincoat you're wearing is parched. Your black wool cap holds firm on your bowed head that looks like a block of marble Michelangelo has begun to chisel. This is how you looked when I flashed you, framed you with light like a tourist attraction. But tourists back away from you, hang onto a chrome pole, look the other way, leave you in an empty row. You are not their idea of Paris. Putting my camera away, I adjust the ostrich feather on my black Parisian hat and carry your image up the stairs to Paris, city of light.
Okay, so that's an ironic poem. I like that poem. I mean, it's a poem or it's a prose
Okay,
piece?
so that's
poem?
good that's so
I
good
thought
you
it was
brought
a
that
poem,
up. No, it is. This is flash prose.
Okay.
But see, what I like about flash prose, I've been told early on when I was writing. Early on, I was later in my life, when I was 30 or something. But people said, "You're a poet. You write really good poetry." But I couldn't quite get it. Some of the poets said, "That's not really poetry," and that's because I write poetic flash prose. You see what I mean? And that's true. This form, flash fiction and flash memoir, have a poetic nature to them. Here's a book, prose poetry. So it's poetry? Hey, that ain't prose, it's poetry. Well, this is poetic. I write poetic prose. So I don't do just straight, okay, but I'll read you.
But it's interesting, you also have poetic prose or prose poem. So, could you talk about the irony in that particular poem? I mean, our prose work,
here
I
they're
guess.
all these people.
Flash
They're
fiction,
going
sorry.
to Paris. Oh, yeah. Well, here I thought that what I do is read.
Because I like the irony in that particular
We'll
piece.
talk about that.
Well,
You
I mean,
talk
no,
about
you could talk about that. What was ironic in it, or why?
Well, because we're in Paris, and here's this person who she's sleeping, and she's got a place to sleep, and she's going back and forth. She's not going to get off at the. Yeah, and these people, and the people, I looked at them, and I felt embarrassed a little. I mean, the people were just looking away. Let's grab the pole here. Let's look over here. They didn't want to look at this person. They didn't disturb her, but they didn't want to look at that. This was not their idea of Paris. And then, but look at me. I'm writing, and I'm looking at this, and I got this nice, very expensive black Parisian hat, and I got a nice camera. And I'm on this metro, but I'm not. You're gonna just see what I mean? I felt kind of embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed, but and I'm looking at her, and I also got a little upset. I actually took photographs of her. I have them at home. If you at my house, I have this Paris Underground picture, and I have a picture of her.
But do you think that...
I felt terrible because, I mean,
okay, so
I shouldn't have photographed her.
It
that was
ultimately goes back to, like, conscience about the person and feeling, understanding that person is part of the picture when that person has been left out of the picture.
Yes, and then I said, no, don't feel bad about snapping that photograph, because that person is just what you said so well.
Do you think our society, or I mean our world today, like there's a lot of people left out of the picture, it seems like, and it seems like even with majorities in certain countries, even they are becoming minorities. So it's like people are, everybody has been an other for somebody else, it seems like, but then this person, or like some people who are like for example the homeless or people who are extremely marginalized, it's even a very different story too. Like, do you think our society will ever try to do a better job, like trying to be more compassionate to the people who don't have as much?
I'm sorry to say I don't think this is going to change, given the way this world is going, and compassion has just gone out the door, except for a few. I'm going to even say a few people, but I don't know. It's just, I don't even know how to...
And then a lot of people are hopeful about the younger generation, but if they learn everything that they learned from their parents, wouldn't they just repeat it as well, or just from society, parents and
but
society?
But the younger generation is totally different, because we've had that pandemic, we've got the whole world missing. We can't even talk about, and the family has got messed up from all families. I mean, schooling, it's really much more complicated now. We've got a really complicated
mess.
Mess. Thank you, mess.
Okay, well, this was a really... Do you want to read one more piece?
No, the reason I want to read this last one, because this is really a poetic prose. Poetic prose. I want to show you that I do this too. I'm only allowed 100 words. Allowed meaning there are a lot of calls for 100 words, stories. They want stories, 100 word stories. And I wanted to make it, line it up like poetic prose. So I called it Clouds Got in Our Way. First I called it Clouds Got in My Way, because this is my story, and so in my way. No, I think it's in our way, speaking of relationships. So I did that. Clouds got in our way. I didn't feel I played a part except to make possible your transcending to be all you wanted to be. I served your purposeful longings. I was useful, but less youthful over time that transpired and eventually expired. It was as if we were thrown together by some windstorm. We settled down even after the light went out, as if we could forgive ourselves, all ourselves, for being all we couldn't be after all. Our story is an old story, still it must be told. How the dream shifted, how the hope shuddered, how thrown together we racked apart. Clouds got in our way. Isn't that a poetic poem?
That's good, yeah. So what do you think the clouds are a metaphor for?
Oh, problems. I could write a novel. I started to do that about all the some problems I got in the way. I'm like, and I think that now I think I'm just being noisy because that's sort of how. And then I ended up throwing out the 300-page thing I was working on, and then I'll get it down to 200. The 200, and this is what I'm going to use because I think it really captures. I mean, what do you think about in terms of?
So, what do you think is the difference between like a novelist's sensibility about writing and a flash fiction person's sensibility about writing?
Well, also memoir. You know, I have a memoir. But if you're talking about a novel, well, because it has all these chapters. You've got to be very careful about lining up the chapters. I don't even use that. Scenes or something like that. And the story, the difficulty writing. I'm not a novel writer. I tried it, but. A friend of mine, she only writes novels. She can't. I don't know how you write that flash prose in this poem. I can't do that. See what I mean? It's something different. Okay, so the novel. First, when you're drafting, you got to draft and redraft because this is big, you know. So you draft and redraft. Okay, you go through that, but then you got to get to the point where you're not just telling what happened. And like I never wanted to write, oh, this is what happened. But you have to. It's this. You've got to get into storytelling. Hello, you got to write a story. You can't just on this night that, or they met here and then that happened over there and then
like what's the plot and the
and it's I thought I had plotful thought. It has to be central conflict, but it has to move in a so it's so I can see my colleague who writes novels. I mean, she knows how to do that. I don't. But so I discarded it. But I'm really glad that I went through all that during the pandemic and wrote and all of that because look at I got this piece. Isn't that funny? I mean, I went from 300 pages to 200 pages, and then a writer friend of mine, and I just kind of yelled back at her recently in New York City, whom I studied with years ago. She invented the short story. Well, I asked her if she'd read this second draft I was working on. She just was screaming at me on Zoom. She said, you got the, now it's all about teaching and it's about, and then that, I want to hear more about what he wants to know. And I done that. And why did you do that? I'm like, hang on. It's like noise. And it's just like, and she said, you need to write in scenes like you did your other book. That book was really the way to write it. So you just take this and you go back and you write in scenes. See, but I have drama background. And so, and I even wrote a play, and I even acted in the play. So I am good at scenes. It fits in, but I couldn't make this work in scenes. I could for her, for him, for some over here and there, and then I just got tired. And I thought, you know what? I'm not just giving this up. It helped me process, and actually, in a way, it helped me actually get here with Clouds in Our Way. Isn't that something? Clouds get in our way.
That's great.
What?
I really enjoyed this interview. I thought it was really interesting.
Really?
Yeah, maybe we should continue with this.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love to read some different ones, and just because they're good to talk about, right?
Yeah, so let's definitely continue with this in another episode.
Oh, thank you for doing this kind of work. Is it fun?
Yes, I really enjoy it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Okay.